My brothers and sisters, I stand before you today not with a prepared speech, but with a scream that has been trapped in the throats of millions. This is the scream that echoes from Kampala's blood-stained streets to the villages where mothers weep alone in darkness. This is the scream that refuses to be suffocated by official statements and diplomatic silence. When I saw what happened in Uganda, when I watched young people fall under bullets simply for demanding to breathe, to speak, to dream without terror, something inside me shattered. Because I know that this is not just Uganda's story. This is our story. This is Africa's story, written in the blood of Burkina Faso, in the tears of Congo, in the silence of Zimbabwe, in the broken promises of 100 nations. What I witnessed is what happens when a leader looks into his people's eyes and sees only strangers. When power becomes a wall so thick that no cry can penetrate it. When a nation's pain becomes invisible to the one sworn to carry it. This is not about politics. This is about something far deeper. This is about the moment when leadership dies and tyranny is born. When young people flood the streets asking for nothing but their basic rights and are met with military force instead of dialogue. It is not just their bones that break. It is the spine of our entire continent. When a government deploys soldiers against its own children, the air fills not just with tear gas, but with the ghost of every colonial master who taught us that African lives are expendable. Every baton that falls on a student's back carries the echo of chains our ancestors died to break. Every voice silenced is a betrayal of every freedom fighter who believed independence meant dignity. This is the pain of every African who dared to believe their leader would be different. And yet, here we are in 2024, still fighting the same battles our grandparents thought they had won. I am young. Many say too young to speak with such authority, but age is not measured in years when your soul has walked through fire. I came to power not through lineage or military cunning alone, but through a promise whispered in the hearts of a generation that refused to die in silence. I represent something dangerous to old systems, the possibility that a leader can still feel, that a president can still bleed when his people bleed, that power does not have to turn a human being into stone. When I speak, you do not hear rehearsed political scripts written by advisors who have never missed a meal. You hear the raw voice of a man who knows what it means to watch your country suffocate under corruption, to see your sisters lack medicine in hospitals that should be healing them, to bury friends who died from preventable diseases because the national budget was devoured by men in expensive suits who travel in convoys while children walk barefoot to schools without roofs. I have seen what happens when a government forgets that its first duty is to its people. I have watched mothers choose which child gets to eat because there is not enough food for all. I have seen young people with university degrees selling phone credit on street corners because the economy has been hollowed out by corruption. I have witnessed the quiet desperation in the eyes of farmers who work from sunrise to sunset but cannot afford to send their children to school. I am the embodiment of Africa's refusal to accept that leadership must always become betrayal. I am living proof that the son can choose a different path than the father, that we do not have to repeat the same cycles of hope and disappointment, revolution and oppression, liberation and tyranny. This is why my words to Museveni cut so deep, because they came from profound recognition, from a place of knowing exactly what happens when power corrupts a once noble heart. I looked at Uganda and saw Burkina Faso. I looked at young people bleeding in the streets and saw my own people. I looked at a leader who had become deaf to his nation's cries and saw the ghost of every liberation hero who lived long enough to become the oppressor. I saw the trajectory that I myself must constantly fight against, the gravitational pull of power that tries to convince every leader that they are indispensable, that their people need them to rule forever, that leaving power would be a betrayal of their legacy. Your people deserved better. 5 words, simple, devastating, true. Not an insult, not diplomatic provocation, but a lament, a recognition of tragedy that did not have to happen, a statement of fact that cannot be disputed by anyone who witnessed what transpired in Uganda's streets. The world saw everything, and this is what haunts every dictator in the digital age. In this era of cameras and smartphones, there is nowhere to hide. The footage exists. The evidence is immortal. History will not forget. The blood on the pavement is documented. The cries of mothers are recorded. The fear in young eyes is captured forever. No amount of propaganda can erase what the world has witnessed. No state television broadcast can contradict the videos that circulated globally within hours. Yoweri Museveni, a name that once carried the weight of revolution, a guerrilla fighter who spoke the language of liberation, a man who came to power in 1986 promising fundamental change. There was a time when his name was mentioned alongside the great resistors, when he stood before crowds speaking of African dignity, of ending dictatorship, of building a nation where every voice mattered. I know this history, I have studied it, I have read his speeches from those early years, and they sound like speeches I might give today. He spoke about the problems of African leadership, about presidents who clung to power, about the need for term limits and democratic accountability. He was, in his own words, going to be different. But something happened along the way, something that happens too often on this continent, something I see in my nightmares and fight against every single day. The revolutionary becomes the institution. The liberator becomes the jailer. The man who fought against lifetime presidencies decides rules do not apply to him. The one who condemned corruption becomes its chief architect. The people who once danced in the streets celebrating his arrival now run from soldiers wearing his orders like armor. This is the African tragedy written in 1,000 variations across our continent. The story of how power corrupts not gradually but absolutely. How a man can look in the mirror and no longer recognize the young fighter he used to be. How a leader convinces himself that holding power is national service, that his people are not ready for change, that he alone understands what is best for them, that without him the nation would collapse into chaos. But the people are not children waiting to be told what is good for them. The people are not a resource to be managed or a threat to be controlled. When citizens march demanding accountability, they are not asking permission, they are not begging for favors, they are reclaiming what was always theirs by right, what was stolen from them through violence and manipulation and the slow erosion of democratic institutions. The confrontation in Uganda is about a choice every African leader must make, a choice I must make every single day. Will you listen or will you silence? Will you serve or will you rule? Will you recognize that the presidency is temporary but the nation is eternal? Will you understand that you are a custodian, not an owner, that you hold power in trust for the people, and that trust can be revoked? Museveni chose violence when his people demanded dialogue. He chose intimidation when they asked for accountability. He chose to see enemies where there were only exhausted citizens begging to be heard. He looked at young people in the streets and saw a threat to his power, rather than the children of Uganda crying out for a future. In doing so, he joined the long list of African leaders who forgot that the people are not the enemy, that the greatest threat to any nation is not its citizens demanding change, but its leaders refusing to listen. The military is not meant to be aimed inward. This is a fundamental principle that every leader must understand. Soldiers are trained to protect borders, not to shoot school children. Police exist to serve communities, not to terrorize them. When a government fears its own population more than external threats, it has lost its legitimacy. When leaders deploy violence against protesters, they are not displaying strength. They are revealing their deepest weakness, their most profound failure. They admit they have run out of arguments, cannot defend their record, have nothing left to offer but fear. This moment transcends Uganda. This is a mirror held up to every African capital where leaders have overstayed their welcome. This is about every country where elections are theatrical performances with predetermined outcomes, where the results are known before the first vote is cast. This is about every nation where youth unemployment is a national emergency but the president's convoy has 50 cars. Every place where hospitals lack basic supplies but government officials fly to Europe for medical treatment. Every capital where schools are crumbling but ministers send their children to private academies abroad. This is about the silent agreement between old men in power who protect each other's thrones while their nations crumble beneath them. The unspoken pact that says we will not criticize each other, we will not hold each other accountable, we will maintain the facade of African unity even as we individually betray everything our independence movement stood for. The anger you see in Uganda is the same anger simmering in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in Zimbabwe, in Cameroon, in every place where a generation looks at their leaders and sees only obstacles to their future. The frustration is continental, the exhaustion is collective, the realization is spreading like wildfire across our lands. We do not need strongmen, we need servants. We do not need fathers who rule until death. We need leaders who understand their time is limited and their duty is sacred. We do not need liberators who become oppressors. We need public servants who remember that they work for the people, not the other way around. This is where my intervention becomes revolutionary, because I am breaking the code of silence that has protected dictators for generations. For too long, African leaders have had an unspoken pact. Do not criticize each other publicly. Do not call out each other's abuses. Maintain the illusion of Pan-African unity even as you brutalize your own people. Attend each other's summits and smile for cameras while your citizens suffer in silence. This gentleman's agreement has protected corruption and tyranny for decades. It has allowed human rights abuses to flourish behind the language of sovereignty and non-interference. It has created a club of impunity where leaders shield each other from accountability while their people pay the price. But I looked at that agreement and set it on fire. I chose the people over the club. I chose truth over diplomatic comfort. I chose to say out loud what millions have been whispering in fear. In doing so, I have done something profoundly dangerous and profoundly necessary. I have reminded African leaders that they will be judged not just by history books written by sympathetic scholars, but by their peers, by other African leaders who still remember what it means to serve, by a generation that refuses to accept that brutality is the price of stability. When I say your people deserved better, I am speaking to Museveni, yes, but I am also speaking to every African leader who has lost their way, to those who have confused longevity with legacy, who think that staying in power for decades is an achievement rather than a failure of democratic institutions, to presidents who measure success by how long they remain in office rather than by how much they transform their nations, by the size of their palaces rather than the quality of their people's lives, to those who have built monuments to themselves while their people live in shacks without clean water or electricity, to leaders who have forgotten that power is a loan from the people, not an inheritance to be passed to their children like a family business. And when I say the world saw everything, I am issuing a warning that the age of impunity is ending. Technology has fundamentally changed the game. Massacres cannot be hidden anymore. Lies cannot be sustained in the face of video evidence. The international community may be slow, may be hypocritical, may be selective in its outrage, but the evidence remains. The videos exist. The testimonies are recorded. And future generations will look back at this moment and ask why we were silent, who spoke up and who looked away, who had the courage to break ranks and who chose complicity. But this story is not just about leaders and their failures. This story is fundamentally about the people, about the courage of ordinary citizens who became extraordinary through their willingness to stand up, about young Ugandans who walked into the streets knowing they might not return home, knowing that soldiers with live ammunition were waiting for them, about students who chose courage over safety, who chose to speak even when silence would have kept them alive, about mothers who gave their children permission to protest because they understood something profound, that silence is a slower death, that a life lived in fear is not a life worth living, that some things are worth dying for, about journalists who documented everything even as they were being hunted by security forces, about activists who refused to be intimidated even when their friends disappeared into police stations and never came out, about the doctors who treated wounded protesters in secret, about the lawyers who defended arrested activists, knowing they too could be targeted, about the musicians who wrote songs of resistance, about the teachers who taught their students that challenging injustice is the highest form of patriotism. These are the true heroes of this story. They did not have military training or political power. They did not have wealth or connections to protect them. They did not have diplomatic immunity or international platforms. All they had was a belief that they deserved better, that their country deserved better, that Africa deserved better. And that belief was enough to make them move, powerful enough to make them risk everything, strong enough to challenge a system that seemed invincible. People of Uganda, hear me clearly. You did not fail. The system failed you, your leaders failed you, but you yourselves showed up. You carried your pain into the public square and refused to pretend everything was fine. You broke the silence that tyrants depend on for their survival. You made your suffering visible. You forced the world to pay attention, to witness, to take sides. You reminded everyone watching that Africans are not passive victims waiting to be saved by foreign intervention. You are agents of your own liberation. You are the ones who will determine your future. No external force will come to rescue you. No foreign power will deliver your freedom on a silver platter. It will come from your own hands, your own voices, your own refusal to accept oppression as normal or inevitable. Even though you were beaten back this time, even though many of you carry physical and psychological scars, even though some of your brothers and sisters did not survive, you planted something in Uganda's soil that cannot be uprooted by any amount of state violence. You planted the memory of resistance. You showed the next generation that it is possible to stand up, that ordinary people have power, that the system can be challenged. You proved that the people are not powerless even when they are outgunned, outnumbered by security forces, and facing a state willing to kill its own children. This truth terrifies every dictator because they know that once a people lose their fear, the game is over. Once a population realizes that the emperor has no clothes, that the system only works because we consent to it, that power is ultimately a performance that collapses when we stop believing in it, then no amount of military force can sustain control forever. You can arrest protesters. You can shut down the internet. You can ban gatherings and declare states of emergency. You can fill your prisons with activists and journalists. But you cannot arrest an idea whose time has come. You cannot imprison a dream that lives in millions of hearts. You cannot kill the hunger for dignity that is embedded in human DNA. You cannot shoot dead the aspiration for freedom that defines what it means to be human. This is why Museveni's violence, even if it achieves temporary silence, has already lost the long war. because he has shown his people who he truly is. He has removed the mask. He has revealed that he values his position more than their lives, that he would rather kill Ugandans than listen to them, that power matters more to him than the people he swore to serve, and that revelation cannot be reversed. Trust broken at this scale cannot be repaired by speeches or promises or cosmetic reforms. To Museveni directly I say this: you had a choice. At every step of this crisis, you had a choice. You could have been remembered as the man who built Uganda, who transformed a war-torn nation into a beacon of stability and development. Instead, you are becoming the man who shot Uganda, whose legacy will be defined by the blood of young people on Kampala's streets. You could have listened to your people and shaped a peaceful transition that preserved at least some of your legacy, that allowed you to leave office with dignity. Instead, you chose repression and violence, and in doing so, you guaranteed that your name will forever be associated with brutality against your own citizens. You will not be remembered for the wars you won or the peace you brought in your early years. You will be remembered for this, for the moment you turned your guns on your children. The world saw everything. History is watching. And you cannot edit the footage that has already gone viral. You cannot rewrite the testimonies that have been recorded. You cannot silence the mothers whose children will never come home. Your legacy is being written in blood, and no amount of propaganda, no number of state-controlled newspapers or television broadcasts can wash it clean. But this is not the end of the story. This is not the final chapter of Uganda or of Africa. This is the middle, the moment of maximum tension before the breakthrough. This is the darkness before the dawn. Across our continent, something is stirring. It does not yet have a name or a single manifesto. It is not yet a unified movement with headquarters and official spokespeople, but it is real and it is growing. It is the sound of a generation refusing to inherit their parents' fear. It is young people choosing solidarity over tribalism, choosing Pan-African unity over the divisions that have been used to control us. It is the moment of recognition when a Burkinabe leader speaks truth to a Ugandan dictator, and people across the continent say yes, finally someone said it, finally someone broke the silence. It is activists sharing strategies across borders, learning from each other's successes and failures. It is artists using music and film and poetry to tell stories that politicians want buried forever. It is journalists risking everything to document truth in countries where truth-telling is a crime. It is everyday citizens who go to work, raise their families, and quietly refuse to believe the official lies anymore, who teach their children that there is another way, that Africa does not have to be like this. This is how change begins, not with a single dramatic moment that transforms everything overnight, but with a million small acts of courage that accumulate, that build on each other, until the dam breaks and the flood of change becomes unstoppable. So this is the message that must echo from Ouagadougou to Kampala, from Cape Town to Cairo, from Lagos to Nairobi. Your people deserved better. But more than that, your people will demand better. They will organize, they will resist, they will persist, they will outlast you because you are one man and they are millions. You have guns and soldiers and security forces, but they have time and numbers and history on their side. Eventually, inevitably, justice arrives, not because the universe is inherently fair or because some divine force intervenes. Justice arrives because people make it so through sacrifice, through persistence, through the absolute refusal to accept oppression as destiny, through the courage of those who stand up knowing they might fall. The world saw everything, and the world will remember. But more importantly, Africa saw everything, and Africa will not forget. We will not forget the young people who died for demanding basic rights. We will not forget the mothers who wept over their children's bodies. We will not forget the leaders who chose violence over dialogue. This is my promise to you, my brothers and sisters across Africa. I will not be silent. I will not join the club of leaders who protect each other's corruption. I will not value diplomatic comfort over the lives of African youth. I will continue to speak the truth, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it costs me allies, even when it makes me enemies, because I believe in a different Africa, an Africa where leaders actually serve, where power changes hands peacefully, where young people do not have to die just to be heard, where our resources benefit our people, not foreign corporations and corrupt officials, where hospitals have medicine and schools have books and farmers have support and innovation is funded and talent is celebrated. This is not a fantasy. This is what we fought for. This is what independence was supposed to deliver, and we will not rest until we achieve it. The struggle continues, and we will win because we must win, because our children deserve better, because Africa deserves better, your people deserve better, and together we will build the Africa they deserve.